I recently heard a story. It's not just one story, but story after story after story of individuals who have previously been told, "You're not welcome in this church." Not this church. I have heard people being refused Holy Communion because of a certain way that they are or what they did wrong, a certain fill in the blank. I have heard stories recently about people being told, "Get your act together and figure it all out before coming to church." I don't know about you, but these kinds of stories feel like getting punched in the gut. It's a painful thing for me to hear. You know, when I was growing up, there was a man in the church that I was in, and this man was put in charge of the next generation ministries of the church. That meant the children's ministry and the youth ministry. One day he walked into the youth gathering, and he had all the kids sit around, and he said that if the boys don't wear suits to church, and if the girls don't wear dresses to church, that we shouldn't come to church at all. And I remember I sat there, I was looking around the room, and I was like, oh man. And I saw that my brother and me, and then that man's son were the only kids wearing a suit and tie. For a very brief moment, I felt very qualified. But very quickly, I felt very uncomfortable. Because in the face of all of the gathering of about maybe 40 students, they were my friends. They were my friends. And I also knew they couldn't even afford a suit and tie. And the man continued to talk then about hairstyles. What hairstyle was acceptable? What kind of speech was acceptable? And going down a list of things that meant what it meant to be a, quote, good Christian. And I knew that I was wearing what I was wearing because my parents made it happen that way. My dad was the pastor, and I was a pastor's kid. And my parents set those expectations. But they also figured it out to make sure that I had what it took to do that. But even then, I knew I actually really didn't like it. I also felt that many of my friends were feeling truly disqualified in that moment. Now, since then, this still remains in my memory so strong. Since then, I had began to have this awareness that people should never, ever feel disqualified from participating in church. Perhaps you know the feeling of being disqualified. Whether you've disqualified yourself because of choices that you made, or because someone else made rules and set expectations on you that were designed for you to fail. And the church must be a community where we do not practice that. But rather, the church should be known for extending grace upon grace upon grace. Extending grace because we are here because of grace, because of mercy. A fellow United Methodist clergy person, Javon Caldwell Gross, who works for the Indiana Conference in our United Methodist Church, said this. He said, "In a world where trust in institutions is declining, one of the most fundamental questions people are asking is, am I going to feel safe here?" Right? Are we creating safe space where we are in a world of trust in institutions declining? Today we begin this, we began this on Ash Wednesday, but we're in this message series called Jesus Table. If you read the Gospels closely, you're going to notice something very unexpected about Jesus that always threw people out for a spin. They weren't ever expecting it. It always disrupted their understanding of what it meant to believe in God, to be a people of faith. There was always something very unexpected about Jesus, and that's he was at a table, but he was at the, quote, wrong tables. And Jesus' ministry was not just in the temples or preaching to the crowds or doing the things that religion oftentimes does. He would sit down and he would share meals. Tables actually drew lines. Tables decided who was in and who was out. And Jesus just kept sitting at the wrong ones. He sat with people who were judged. He sat with people who were condemned and ostracized and rejected. People who didn't fit into the rules correctly. And the people were curious about this. The people who were powerful were observing this. And people who were broken and hurting and left out or treated differently because of whatever situation of their life, they were brought in. And every time Jesus did this, something changed. Their lives shifted, shame was lifted, and boundaries were moved. And so this season we're exploring those stories. And we're exploring those stories not as ancient history. I want to invite you to think about these stories not as, oh, well, that just happened a long time ago. But I would like to invite you to a space of thinking about these stories as living invitations that are relevant for today, into your life, into my life. We all know what it feels like to wonder, do I belong? And I know one of the slides said, Restoration Church, you belong here. And it matters that we practice that. It matters that we really create that culture. We all might have been through a period of life where we wondered, do I belong? I felt that in middle school for sure, right? Middle school is probably a common ground that a lot of people share, like, oh, that was one of the most awkward years of my life. Or you're wondering, did I belong? Do I look all right? Am I behaving right? Am I speaking right? Am I doing things right? And that's not the only time, of course. There's many other moments in our lives where belonging might be a big question mark. We all know what that's like. We all carry parts of our story that feel unfinished or unworthy or unqualified. And so the question that we're asking here is that, well, in that space, specifically in that space of your life, what happens when Jesus pulls up a chair at the table with you? Because when that happens, everything changes. And today we take a look at a story of a man who's sitting at a booth and someone who would never expect the kind of invitation that came his way. There are spaces in our lives where we quietly believe that we are disqualified. Especially in our Northern Virginia culture, we don't go around boasting about everything that's wrong with us. We're more likely to boast about everything that we think is right with us. But deep down inside, the stuff that keeps you awake at night, the stuff that you wrestle with about your worth, your value, your belonging, your sense of self, the validity of your life, whatever those things might be. You know, and there's that part of my life, that decision I made, that relationship, that habit, that failure, that compromise. And we make assumptions in those moments that God may love all these other people, but not that part of me. That part. I'm not so sure about that. And today's text, Luke chapter 5, the Gospel of Luke, introduces us to a man who lived in that kind of a space, and his name is Levi. And in this story, Jesus approaches Levi right at the booth that Levi is in. This is what it says. Afterward, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at a kiosk, a booth, for collecting taxes. It's more like an enclosed one. If you ever watched the Chosen series, the tax collector, Matthew, is inside this enclosed booth. And Jesus walks up and says to him, "Follow me." Levi got up and left everything behind and followed him. Then Levi threw a great banquet for Jesus in his home. A large number of tax collectors and others sat down to eat with him. The Pharisees and their legal experts grumbled against his disciples. They said, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. I didn't come to call righteous people, but sinners to change their hearts and lives." Now let's break this apart. Levi is a tax collector. Now, what's the deal with the tax collector? In first century Judea, Rome imposed multiple taxes. Land tax, poll tax, trade tariffs, and all these different ways of taxation. But the way Rome did it was Rome would outsource the tax collecting. So the Roman officers would not come and do the tax collecting themselves. They would outsource this work to the people, the local people. And in Judea, a local Jewish man could purchase the right to collect these taxes. He would pay Rome a fixed amount and then collect whatever he could beyond that. The system invited exploitation. It was built in. And so Levi, much like all these other tax collectors, there would be a certain amount that was required to pay, but they would hike it up so they can get more. And so Levi is in this booth, probably like a customs booth in this town called Capernaum. And Capernaum is this commercial hub where fishing and trade routes took place. There's fishermen, there's merchants, there's families transporting goods, and they're passing by every day. And people are required to pay tax after tax after tax. To the Jewish community, Levi represented aligning with the empire. To his neighbors, he represented foreign control, economic oppression, exploitation of his own people, betrayal. Every coin that he collected reminded them that they were not a free people. In addition to that, during that time, the Jewish faith was deeply communal and covenantal. What that means is that, in our culture in the United States, we're very individualistic. But in first century Israel, the Jewish faith, that culture, that community, was very collective. It was very communal. What you did was really impactful. You were always being aware of, if I do this, how is this going to affect not just my immediate family, but my neighborhood, my community, my nation. It was baked into the way of their awareness and how they lived their lives. But it was also covenantal. Meaning that going back to the Old Testament, when God makes a covenant with the Israelites, with the 10 Commandments and all the 613 covenantal laws that God makes with Israel. Observing the Torah, guarding your religious ritual practices, purity, maintaining boundaries that preserve holiness, that define who you are as a people of God. That was really front and center important. So in that space, if you were a Jewish person collecting taxes representing the empire, you were considered a traitor. And so tax collectors were viewed that way and therefore associated with a group called sinners in the eyes of those who were very religious. They weren't just morally suspect, they were covenantally compromised. And it was about being treated as, in a sense, like we don't associate with tax collectors. So Levi was a collaborator with empire. Levi was this traitor and religiously compromised and someone you really shouldn't trust. And there in that space, Levi had been living a life that would have been like, I know I made this choice to be here and do this role, but I would never be qualified to follow a rabbi. Why is that? In first century Judaism, a rabbi would always have disciples. And the way someone becomes a disciple of a rabbi is that someone has graduated through all the different levels of education, has memorized all the Old Testament, and has spent time interpreting it, and is now looking for a rabbi to get them deeper in their education and eventually so that they themselves can become a rabbi one day. And the only way you become a rabbi is if a rabbi interviews you and makes the conclusion, you can be just like me. If you are not qualified to that extent, a rabbi will never make you a disciple. And the words that a rabbi says to a new disciple to recruit them is, follow me. That is the significance of the words when Jesus says throughout the New Testament Gospels, follow me. It's not just an arbitrary phrase that he's saying. When Jesus says, follow me, he's looking at his disciples and saying, I think you can be just like me. I think you can do what I'm going to do. And so follow me. I will show you. I will make you fishers of people, meaning I will show you how to go and love people and recruit them and bring them into this kingdom of God. You're going to do what I'm doing. If I do this, you're going to do it too. If I teach well, you're going to teach well too. If I pray and there's a miracle that happens, that's going to happen too. Follow me. But the requirement in traditional Judaism was you had to cross all the T's, dot all the I's, and you had to be the cream of the crop to be able to be called in by a rabbi. So then, in that context, when Jesus walks up to Levi and says, follow me, there's a reason why Levi immediately gets up, leaves it all behind, and follows Jesus. In the place of disqualification, Jesus enters in and says, follow me, I qualify you. A question I invite you to think about is, where do we feel disqualified? Where do we feel unqualified? Which booth, like Levi, are you sitting at? The booth that symbolizes your unqualification. Is it the moral booth? The thing you've done, the habit you can't break, the secret you hope no one discovers? Is it the relationship booth? The time you left, the time someone left you, the estranged relationship? Is it the professional booth? That compromise, the burnout, the job loss, the resume gap? Is it the achievement booth? You didn't get in, didn't make the cut, didn't measure up? Or maybe it's a spiritual booth. I've drifted too far. I doubt too much. I'm not church material. And underneath all of that is this internal booth, that inner dialogue that says, I'm not the kind of person that God would choose. Now, Levi couldn't even pretend to be a good Jew. He couldn't even fake it till you make it. In fact, what really captures my thought here is how Jesus approached him right at the tax collector's booth. Didn't catch him anywhere else, didn't go to him anywhere else where he could pretend he's something. He went right up to the space where all the pretending is gone. That's exactly where Jesus met him, and that's exactly where Jesus meets us. Jesus does not wait for Levi to change his ways. He goes to Levi right where he is and says, follow me. So Levi gets up, leaves everything behind, and follows him. And in following him, Levi throws this big party. He invites all the other tax collectors to show up. He invites all the people that are unqualified to show up, and then Jesus sits at that table, and he does it publicly. Rachel Held Evans wrote a book called Searching for Sunday, Loving, Leaving, and Finding the Church. And this is what she writes. She said, this is what God's kingdom is like. A bunch of outcasts and oddballs gathered at a table, not because they're rich or worthy or good, but because they're hungry, because they said yes, and there's always room for more. Do you believe that about the church? The scandal is not just that Jesus said, follow me. It's what happened afterwards. It's the meal where they all sat together. That he actually meant it. He actually meant, hey, be part of my life. Share life with me. The scandal is that he had a meal and said, you belong at the table with me. And your calling for Levi doesn't just stay in that moment of feeling good about it or just your individual relationship with Jesus. It always brings you to a table where you make space for more. And for Levi made sure that it wasn't just him belonging to Jesus, but that others who are not yet part of that story could also be part of that story. When Jesus eats with Levi, Jesus isn't just being nice. When Jesus says, follow me, he's not just doing a nice gesture. Jesus is publicly identifying with him and creates a scandal. In this honor and shame culture that they were in, reputation was everything. So if you ate with a tax collector, people assumed, oh, you approve of him. You share his moralities. You are compromised. And Jesus puts that aside. He willingly risks his own reputation to restore Levi's reputation. And that's grace. Grace is not just being kind. Grace is saying, I'm going to restore you fully, completely, even if it costs me something. And that's what Jesus demonstrates for us. So Levi is so transformed by this that he opens his house up and he invites all these people to that space so that they might also experience what he's experiencing. And that's simply the way of the gospel. Eugene Cho reminds us, if you truly believe in the gospel, then you have to believe that it matters not just for your personal salvation, but also for God's pursuit of restoration, redemption, and reconciliation for the entire world. right? If you really believe in this good news that Jesus met you at your worst, if you really believe in this good news that Jesus met you in the unqualified space, then you also have to believe that God is in this pursuit of restoring, redeeming, and reconciling the entire world, not just you, but the person sitting next to you, the person living next door to you, and even the person that you disagree with. Yes, that person too. G.K. Chesterton wrote, "We do not want a church that will move with the world. We want a church that will move the world." The question is, what will move the world? The church, at its best, has always been moving the world, a countercultural movement. So in a culture where we highlight the best of people, the church is called to highlight the best of Jesus, who comes to us in our most unqualified moments. That's what the church is called to do. In him, we are truly safe to be all that we are. That first quote I shared with you, that in a world where we have increasing distrust in institutions, the most fundamental thing that we have to ask is it safe? And thanks be to God that Jesus is truly safe for us to truly be us. And that's what we're inviting people to do through the church. So what do? First, before we take the step about inviting others, we start where Levi started. What booth do you need Jesus to come and find you? Which booth is that for you? We all have one. I mean, if you're me, you got a lot too. There's a lot. Some of you might be like really much better than me and be like, I have only one. But I know I have like a lot, right? Which booth? Name it. Name it. And go to God with it and say, this is the booth I'm in. This is the space where I feel really unqualified, God. And hear Jesus' invitation in that space to say, follow me. Follow me. And when you hear that, the invitation is to build longer and bigger tables. Invite other people to the table of Jesus. Will you hear Jesus say, follow me, in the midst of that thought, God will never accept me like this? Will you hear that? Will you hear that deep in your soul? We're going to take Holy Communion in just a moment. And before we come up, I just want to remind us that communion is one of the greatest gifts that Jesus gave us, and that it's not a reward for the polished. It's not a reward for your achievements. Communion is the equalizer. We all come just as we are, no matter what it is. If you feel unqualified, this table is for you. If you feel like you're sitting at one of those booths, this table is for you. So come and hear Jesus say that you follow me. And when you say yes to that, it's not just about you. You are also sent from a booth to a table and into the mission of sharing the good news of Christ with the world. During this season, for the next 40 days that we are doing this Lenten season, really, let's dive deep into this. Let's dive deep into what Jesus invites every one of us to do. Whatever booth you're at, hear Jesus say, follow me. Get up, follow him. Go to the table, invite people to that space so we can all experience the wonder of this unexpected invitation. Amen?